I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And as always, I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News courts and crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala. Great to have you back here on the program, Liz. We took a week off, and now we know the result of a second trial of Gabriel Moreno for the murder and dismemberment case that we've discussed here on the docket before. But there are new details, another turn of the screw regarding this case. It's very interesting. What happened, Elizabeth?
Yes, as you recall, we have discussed the brutal killing that happened on September 30th, 2014 of Jose Luis Menchaca, who was known as Pee-wee. We've discussed it quite a bit, Chance, because of its gruesome details. Moreno and his cousin, Daniel Lopez, beat the victim with baseball bats. He was suffocated, the body was dismembered, and parts burned on a barbecue grill. And of course, it's rather large cast of prosecution witnesses. But now the change here, or the new development, is that Bexar County District Attorney-elect Joe Gonzalez has said he's going to conduct a full investigation into how prosecutors handled the murder trial of Gabriel Moreno that just ended with a not guilty verdict.
So yes, there's a couple different things going on with this case, Elizabeth. You have the acquittal, which I'm sure prosecutors and the new DA not happy about, but you also have what may have affected the case to go to an acquittal, and that's something that really had courthouse insiders on the edge of their seats. Tell me more about that.
Yes. Well, I was out last week, Chance, and my esteemed colleague Bruce Selcraig picked up for me. I was able to cover the beginning part of the retrial, but Bruce picked it up right as things got a little heated up, and he also covered the acquittal. He interviewed incoming DA Joe Gonzalez, who told Bruce that he has requested a transcript of a hearing in the trial that detailed how prosecutors privately interviewed a defense witness who was out on parole without notifying Moreno's defense attorney, Albert Gutierrez, who had subpoenaed her to testify. So Lisa Trevino is the witness that we're talking about. And she was subpoenaed by Albert Gutierrez and Kelly Fight, who were representing Gabriel Moreno. But when she arrived that day to testify, Albert and Kelly were not in the courtroom. So at that point, prosecutors Matthew Ludwig, Ryan Groomer, and Christian Newman took Miss Trevino to an interview room, and they questioned her about her role in what happened to Menchaca. And she was basically without a lawyer and without the family members that had taken her to the court. So the issue was whether, the thing that they had wanted for her to testify to was whether she was at the house at the time that the beating and the killing took place. It has been said that she was watching the children of third co-defendant Candy Dominguez while the men allegedly beat and killed Menchaca. Or the other issue that was raised as well is that she might have already left the house. So when this happened in Judge Rangel's court, the defense just completely was upset about it because they didn't know that she had arrived early, and then she was taken into a room by prosecutors. And basically what ended up happening, Chance, is that when court started back up, prosecutors called Trevino to testify. And at that point, Judge Ron Rangel asked her if she wanted a lawyer, and he appointed one for her. And this lawyer basically instructed her to plead the Fifth Amendment and her right not to incriminate herself. So in the end, after lots of arguing from prosecutors and defense attorneys and outside the presence of the jury, the court case continued on. And basically, what ended up happening in discussions that I've had with Bruce and in reading his reporting is that there really wasn't any DNA or any witnesses who could say that Moreno killed Menchaca. And as before, when the jury last year took up this case and proceedings lasted and the trial was able to be completed, it took the jury 4 days before they came back and said that they could not reach a unanimous verdict. This time, though, it took only a few hours, I believe, and the jury came back with a not guilty.
So obviously the new DA who will soon be taking office, not happy about an acquittal. This was the second trial for this defendant, but especially an acquittal that occurred in a trial with something that you just mentioned, the questioning of this witness who then didn't go on to testify. So what is the new DA thinking now about what he wants to do?
Well, Chance, Gonzalez told Bruce that he was very concerned about the verdict. In fact, he called it alarming. And he specifically said that his prosecutors would not carry on the work of his office in that manner. He reiterated that the state has an obligation to notify the defense of their actions. And he said he would even take remedial action if necessary.
One thing I'm wondering, based on what Gonzalez told your fellow reporter, is was this a diss at the outgoing district attorney, Nico LaHood? Was this just a general statement about this type of thing should not happen? What do you think about those comments?
Well, that is a really interesting question, Chance, because I don't think we've ever discussed this before, but there was a dust-up in a courtroom between DA Nico LaHood and incoming DA Joe Gonzalez over a murder case that actually also ended in a mistrial when Joe Gonzalez and his second chair, Christian Henriksen, accused Nico LaHood and his second chair, Jason Goss, with prosecutorial misconduct because they had they accused LaHood and Goss of withholding crucial information in this murder case regarding a relationship that happened between one of the assistant district attorneys and a key witness in a case several years ago. And that particular case it imploded, and LaHood and Gonzalez, who had actually been friends and at some point law partners years ago, were no longer friends, and that actually was a catalyst. Gonzalez has told the Express News before that made him want to run for district attorney. So I guess you could kind of say that this would be somewhat of maybe a dig at LaHood or how his prosecutors operate under him versus how they would operate as Gonzalez wants for them to. So that is a very interesting point. I would say you're probably right about that.
Yeah, it's such an odd situation, one of those stranger than fiction type of events that pop up in your life, and you're like, no, this is actually happening. But so, interesting discussion. I'm sure maybe that'll come up once Gonzalez actually takes the position in January. So to get back to his comments about this case, the acquittal of Gabriel Moreno. What exactly is he going to be looking at in this investigation? He's obviously said he's not happy with what happened, but what kind of recourse does he have? Were any rules broken?
Well, Gonzalez told Bruce that he would be looking at whether prosecutors violated what is called the Brady Rule, which, we were discussing just moments ago, about the dust-up between Gonzalez and LaHood. The Brady Rule is a legal precedent that requires prosecutors to release every bit of evidence that could be favorable to the accused. And there's also there's a state law also that basically requires the same thing in regard to disclosure. It's called the Michael Morton Act. So Gonzalez is going to look at whether there was a Brady violation or a Michael Morton violation. And, we'll see what happens with that. But, there's maybe we can discuss it next week about all of the changes that are going to be happening at the courthouse, specifically with all of the judges who are leaving. And there's a lot of assistant district attorneys that are going to be leaving as well. There seems to be a changeover whenever you've got a change of the guard, like we have in this particular vein. Joe Gonzalez is going to be bringing in new people, and some of Nico's old people are going to be exiting the courthouse as well.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. So, Elizabeth, as you just mentioned, there was sort of an occurrence, or at least an allegation of this type of rule breaking between the current and upcoming district attorney for Bexar County. We have, I guess you could say, allegations, questions that this happened in this acquittal of Gabriel Moreno. But in your experience, or what you know of what's happened in Bexar County or in Texas generally, does this type of thing happen in the past, or is this really, really a rare occurrence?
Well, it's interesting. During the dust-up between LaHood and Gonzalez, I covered a couple of stories just talking to people across the state, and I was told by a state agency made up of defense attorneys and prosecutors that Brady or Morton violations are always alleged against prosecutors in the state. Bexar County is not the only place that these allegations occur. It's something that can be brought up. I've heard attorneys argue it in court, and I've heard a defense attorney say things like, "Well, no one told me about that. I had no idea that this particular witness had a mental health issue, and I'm just hearing about it now." And I've also heard prosecutors answer back, in front of a judge to say, "Hey, the file is in the court where it's always been, and we put things in the file all the time. All you had to do was go and look at the file." So it's gotten to where I'm surprised, actually, when I don't hear someone allege that there's been a Brady or a Morton violation. But what's different about this particular occurrence that happened last week in Rangel's court is that Rangel told Bruce that in the 10 years that he's been on the bench, he had only seen prosecutors take the stand once to defend their actions in a trial. Now, in this particular case, when everything went crazy and things started really heating up in the courtroom between both sides, Rangel sent the jury out, and he had the prosecutors explain how this particular meeting happened and why the defense didn't know about it. And basically at that point, Albert Gutierrez, who was defending Moreno, told the judge that he was going to subpoena the attorneys. So in this particular case, you had you had two prosecutors, a Bexar County District Attorney's Office investigator, a victim's advocate, and probably a few more people I've heard from the DA's office that were questioning her. So, Rangel's point on that is that he's only seen prosecutors take the stand once to defend their actions in a trial. So that was definitely something that you don't see all the time. Plus, Rangel told Bruce that he believed that if the prosecutors had added an enhanced charge of capital murder, that would have been realistic, or lesser charges of aggravated kidnapping, because if you'll recall, there was someone who said she was held against her will in this whole thing that occurred with the Menchaca killing. And then aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, holding that person, at gunpoint. So he basically told Bruce that, these other things could have given the jury more flexibility if it deadlocked. But, in the end, all we had was one murder charge, and the jurors came back with a not guilty.
And then I guess to wrap things up, Elizabeth, because, it was an acquittal. It's not a mistrial. This defendant, Gabriel Moreno, he's innocent. He is free to go. I assume that means there will never be another retrial on these charges again. So what does that mean for what's coming next for this case? There might be more on the horizon, correct?
Yes. And, as you know, this was the fourth trial concerning Jose Luis Menchaca's killing, which was in retaliation for Menchaca stabbing Lopez in the back over a drug deal gone bad. And as you said, Gabriel Moreno now has been acquitted. And his cousin, Daniel Lopez, was convicted of murder and in November was sentenced to life in prison. And Candy Dominguez, who was Lopez's then girlfriend and the cousin of the victim, pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for a sentence of not more than 30 years in prison. And she did that as part of, giving her testimony in Gabriel Moreno's case to talk about her involvement and what she saw. So that's her deal. So it's possible we will discuss this case at least one more time when she is sentenced. And once that occurs, hopefully we won't be discussing such a gruesome case again.
And thank you to San Antonio Express News courts and crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio and Bexar County, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.